I'm glad everyone is here. I'm also glad we're all enjoying getting to know one another and chatting. It's we come now to week number 39, I believe, if I've been counting correctly. We're going to pick up where we stopped last time. We were looking at, in the middle of discourse number 2, John 14, verses 4 through 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life, is where we are discussing. And in your notebook, I don't know about the bound book from Amazon, but in your notebook that we printed here, maybe what, page 897?
Yes.
Is that where we are? Brave New Worlds. We stopped there. We are talking about truth. And we are discussing truth as the world understands truth. And we are at the moment discussing paradigms, the way science works. Since we live in a scientific world, we're going to need to understand the use of the word truth and in the world that we're living in, so that we then can understand the gospel that says, I am the way and the truth. So that's what we're doing, and we're in the middle of that conversation, and we have been discussing a man by the name of Thomas Kuhn, who wrote an extremely important book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, discussing and in actually the creator of the concept of paradigms and paradigm shifts. So, Brave New Worlds is where we pick up where we left off, and then we'll go from there with what we have to say. Kuhn analyzed the how, the process by which a shift from one paradigm, and if you weren't here last week, if you have a system that counts by twos, you automatically leave out a whole bunch of numbers. If you count by threes, you leave out other. These are systems that you can have. And we're using that as an illustration of what a paradigm is. And then you can have a debate between, are we going to count by threes or you want to count by fives? A debate between which paradigm is the one that works the best. And how do you shift from one? And he's discussing how science actually works. And he's going to say science does not work the way all of the rest of the world thinks science works, as somehow a straight line of eternal progress happening. That actually science creates a paradigm, and once it finally figures out it's worn out and doesn't work any longer, then you begin to transition to a new paradigm that answers questions that have been left unanswered by the other system. And the transition, he calls one to the other a revolution. And so we now come to Brave New Worlds. He analyzed the how, the process by which a shift from one paradigm, one way of thinking, to another occurs. Have we found where we are together? The transition from a paradigm in crisis, one that's under attack or there's a new one beginning to come into play, to a new one from which a new tradition of normal science can emerge, is far from a cumulative process, one achieved by an articulation or an extension of the old paradigm. He's saying it's not this ascent where you're just adding on more information to the old system. Rather, it is a reconstruction of the field from new fundamentals. It is a reconstruction that changes some of the field's most elementary theoretical generalizations, as well as many of its paradigm methods and applications. He's saying science doesn't do what we think it does. The new paradigm offers a new and fresh way of looking at the facts, of handling the same bundle of facts as before, but placing them in a new system of relations with one another by giving them a different framework. We're going to get somewhere. We just have to build the altar again this evening. Change amounts to a change in the visual gestalt, the way things are pictured or looked at, such as looking at an optical illusion in which one either sees, for example, Albert Einstein or Marilyn Monroe. Maybe you've bumped into that one. This illustration can be misleading. Scientists do not see something as something. Instead, they just simply see it. This is what we see. The new paradigm creates a new visual gestalt, picture, a new way of seeing the world. For all intents and purposes, the new paradigm lets one see and enter a new world, a different universe of discourse. If you're having trouble comprehending this, one paradigm used to be the earth is the center of the universe, and therefore the sun goes around the earth, and so do all the stars. And once you start with that position, then you've got to try to track the planets and the stars, and they're going all kinds of weird ways. But if that was our paradigm, it was one way of understanding that the earth was the center of everything. When you shift paradigms to say the earth goes around the sun, and the sun is the center of our little solar system, and Venus is going around it, we're going around it, Mars is going around it, Jupiter, Saturn, and all of the others, then that's a different paradigm. You're still looking at the moon, you're looking at the sun, you're looking at the stars, but you now see, you now understand everything differently. You have a new gestalt in which to then ask questions and within which to understand what you're looking at. So it is a different universe of discourse that now takes place. In a sense, I'm quoting Kuhn, in a sense that I'm unable to explicate further, the proponents of competing paradigms. Is the earth the center of the universe, or is the sun up to the center of our solar system? Those arguing for either one of competing paradigms practice their trades in different worlds. Practicing in different worlds, those that are in the earth as the center, that's called the geocentric, and those that say we're going around the sun, that's the heliocentric. They're really having two different worlds that they're working in. Practicing in the two different worlds, the two groups of scientists see different things when they look from the same point in the same direction. Again, this is not to say they can see anything they please. Both are looking at the same physical world, and what they look at has not changed, but in some areas they see different things, and they see them in a different relationship one to another. So which of these two world views is going to win? The earth is the center, or we're going around the sun is the center? New paradigms create new worlds which compete with the present old paradigm, old worldview. The old world is not transformed into a new world, it is replaced by the new world. You didn't transform saying the earth is the center into, no, we're going around. You just didn't transform that, it's replaced. You threw out the old geocentric system and you replaced it with the new heliocentric system. When paradigms enter, as they must, into a debate about paradigm choice, their role is necessarily circular. Each group uses its own paradigm to argue in that paradigm's defense. So one's talking apples, the other one's talking oranges. Circular arguments within self-contained systems inevitably talk through each other when debating the relative merits of their sides. Those of us that say it's apples are going to be talking apples, they're going to be talking oranges, and we're just doing this. Sounds like American politics, doesn't it? Just two sides looking at the world differently, which is probably a good way to understand where we are. We're in competing paradigms, if you will, in a sense. Circular arguments within self-contained systems talk through each other. We're really always preaching to the choir. That's what we're doing. With each group satisfying more or less the criteria that it dictates for itself. In short, the only one listening to either side are the believers of their own side. Sounds like the United States today. Regardless of the force, the status of the circular argument is only that of persuasion. It cannot be made logically or even probabilistically compelling for those who refuse to step into the circle. Those in this circle are going to stay in this circle, and there's hardly any way to persuade somebody in the other circle to come on over to your circle. Therefore, scientific revolutions are similar to political revolutions. There is no standard higher than the assent of the relevant community. You can't appeal. There's no higher authority to appeal to. Whether we're going to have the czar or whether we're going to have a communist takeover. There's no, which one is it? There's no higher authority to appeal to. You have a revolution that one of them replaces the other. There is no higher authority, no scientific pope or council to which to appeal for a decision in the scientific world. Paradigm choices can never be unequivocally settled by logic and experiment alone, nor would persuasive arguments carry the day. The problem is that scientific knowledge is not progressive or genuinely accumulative. It doesn't accumulate. If it were, new sorts of phenomena would simply disclose order in an aspect of nature where none had been seen or understood before. In the evolution of science, new knowledge would replace ignorance rather than replace the knowledge of another and incompatible source. Now, we think, wow, we used to be ignorant on that. Now we've discovered and we've got knowledge on it. But in the scientific world, you see, if we are counting by threes, and we ask the question, what number comes after 12? Well, the answer is 15. But when you then begin to say, wait a minute, let's count by fours, not threes. And when you count by 4, you still have a 12, but what number comes after 12 now? 16. You haven't replaced knowledge, you haven't replaced ignorance with knowledge. You've now thrown out one set of knowledge, the answer was 15, and have substituted a new set of knowledge, 16. That's the way science works. You don't replace ignorance with knowledge, you replace old knowledge with new knowledge. You throw out what you thought you knew in the old system, and you start from scratch with new knowledge in a new system. And it's a revolution. And we're caught in all of this all the time, where everything we were taught at one point in our lives is now thrown out the window, and we're in a new system with a whole new set of information that's called knowledge and called truth, and everything we used to know or believe or practice isn't just old hat, it's wrong. Feel comfortable? Is that kind of where, okay, you see that? I'm telling you, but we need to know the world we're living in, and that's what we're doing at this point before we bring the gospel to bear to this world we're living in. The popular view of science is incorrect. New knowledge from a new paradigm does not replace ignorance. It replaces old knowledge from the old paradigm. Einstein's theory can be accepted only with the recognition that Newton was wrong. A paradigm shift is a crisis. If the new is true, then all the knowledge based on the old is not true. One who has devoted a lifetime to doing science inside one system, one paradigm, and has mastered the knowledge created inside that system, will not easily replace that system, that paradigm, with a newly created one, especially at the cost of discarding everything he knows to begin all over at square one in a new system. Hey, I've just put in 30 years of my life on an analog system, and we're throwing it out, and it's now digital. I put in all of my life using my hands and my tools, and now it's all on a computer. It's a crisis. How in the world can I throw out 30 years of how I've done work and have to learn a brand new world to do all of my work in? I can't even turn my TV on and watch a movie on the recorder anymore. I don't know. You understand what I'm saying? To begin all over or not, knowing anything inside the new paradigm. That is why a paradigm shift is a revolution. We're undergoing that in our country from the Industrial Revolution to now this digital revolution. That's why it's called a revolution. It's a brand new way of doing stuff. The old is no longer around. How then does a new paradigm gain the political clout to replace the old? Kuhn said this: the transition between competing paradigms cannot be made a step at a time, forced by logic and neutral experience. Like the Gestalt switch, what do you see when you look? It must occur all at once, though not necessarily in an instant, or not at all. Many, perhaps most, cannot make the shift. Kuhn cites the originator of the quantum physics paradigm, Max Planck, who sadly remarked, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with the new." We don't convince somebody to change paradigms. We wait for one set of folks to die out so we can now have all the new people, the new kids, grow up with the new system. It is easy for adherents of the new paradigm to criticize others for their failure to admit their errors even when confronted with strict proof. Now, Kuhn is more sympathetic and sees the matter differently. I would argue, rather, that in these matters of shifting, neither proof nor error is at issue. The transfer of allegiance from paradigm to paradigm is a conversion experience that cannot be forced. He's using religious language. It is a conversion experience to go from one entire way of looking at life and the world to go to a different and new way of looking. So let's understand this conversion experience. We use the word all the time in the church. Conversion is not based on proof or evidence. Conversion is based on communication, albeit persuasive communication between two competing paradigms. The problem is that both sides use predominantly the same terms. This is really true when we're talking religion, isn't it? But must be attaching those terms to nature differently, and their communication is inevitably only partial, the talking back and forth. As a result, the superiority of one theory to another is something that cannot be proved in the debate. Instead, I have insisted, Kuhn is saying, each party must try by persuasion to convert the other. If both groups use the same vocabulary, but use the terms differently, then how can they even hope to talk together, much less to be persuasive? The answer is quite simple. Briefly put, what the participants in communication breakdown can do is recognize each other as members of different language communities and then become translators. If you're again having trouble understanding this, and I don't want to politicize us at all, but if Republicans and Democrats can't talk to each other, we need a translator to tell the Republicans, this is what the Democrats mean when they say this, and tell the Democrats, this is what the Republicans mean when they say this, because they're both using the same terms, democracy and freedom and voting and taxation. And this, but obviously they mean two different things. But we need a translator in the middle if we're actually ever going to have communication. Since both groups use the same terms differently, translation involves finding ways to express one paradigm in new terms in the terms of the other paradigm, so the other person hears something new instead of hearing his own terms being used differently. Translation, therefore, creates if you're still having trouble understanding this, try talking to someone about the Orthodox faith who is a Western Christian, and we're all using the words God and Trinity and salvation and Jesus. We all use the same words, but I assure you we're talking two different languages, two different worlds in which we're coming out of. We have to find some way to express what it is we're talking about to the other person. Translation, therefore, creates an entrance by which others can enter into a new paradigm as a tourist visiting another country. You walk into the Orthodox Church, you think you're in another country. You're in another world. You're a visitor in a foreign country. Translation, therefore, allows the participants in communication in that breakdown to experience vicariously something of the merits and defects of each other's point of view. As such, translation is a potent tool for persuasion and maybe for conversion. Successful translation, learning to talk the Orthodox faith so a Protestant can understand what we're talking. I'm using that again as an example. Successful translation does not guarantee persuasion or conversion. Even persuasion need not succeed, and if it does, it need not be accompanied or followed by conversion. The experiences of persuasion and conversion are not identical. Like Moses turning aside to see the burning bush, persuasion is a choice to turn aside and see what this new paradigm is all about. Okay, I'm willing to say that's not the same as this, but I'm willing to turn aside and see if I can understand what this new thing is all about. I don't know how the proponents of this new view succeed, how they can live it if we're talking Christianity, but I must learn whatever it is they're doing. I want to learn about it. Persuasion begins by turning aside to see, to hear, to learn, and to listen to the translation. That's what we do in our Inquirers class. In turning aside, at some point, the second step occurs in which one begins the process of translating for themselves into their own language what they are encountering within the new paradigm. Oh, so that's what you mean by this, and we begin to put it in our own language. Translating for oneself does not imply either acceptance or conversion to the new. To translate a theory or worldview into one's own language is not to make it one's own. For that one must go native, discover that one is thinking and working in, not simply translating out of a language that was previously forward. Anyone could be a translator of the language and know the language and still not be a native of that language until you actually can slip into it and begin thinking it and so forth. I never forget living in Germany, attempting to learn German, and I woke up one night and I was dreaming in German. Somehow you're slipping into no longer coming across as that ugly American when you walk down the street in a foreign country. It is at this point in self-translation that conversion occurs or it fails to occur. There are those who find themselves fully persuaded of the new view, but nevertheless are unable to internalize it and be at home in that world it helps shape. We have a lot of people that understand the history of the church, come and take the classes. Yes, this is the original church. I think I'll just stay where I am. Intellectually, such a man has made his choice, but the conversion required, if it is to be effective, eludes him. He may use the new theory nonetheless, but he will do so as a foreigner in a foreign environment, an alternative available to him only because there are natives already there doing this and I can be with them. That is, some can accept the idea of a new world, but they cannot step into the new world and begin living there. On the other hand, others find themselves converted. It was not so much a choice, but a dawning upon them after the fact that they are converted. It was not so much a decision. Instead, at some point in the process of learning to translate, he finds that the transition has occurred, that he has slipped into the new language without a decision having been made. In my own case, I woke up one day and realized I'm no longer Protestant. Then I had the choice, what am I going to do with it? Well, I picked up the phone and called Father Constantine and said, We'll be there next Sunday. The conversion experience that I have likened to a Gestalt switch remains, therefore, at the heart of a revolutionary process. Good reasons for choice provide motives for conversion and a climate in which it is more likely to occur. Translation may, in addition, provide points of entry for the neural reprogramming, the mental rethinking, that, however inscrutable at this time, always underlies the conversion. But neither good reasons nor translation constitute conversion. Conversion is an experience of hearing what one has not heard before, and of seeing what one has not seen before, of understanding what one has not understood before, and of knowing that which cannot be taught. Conversion is not an intellectual or academic choice. Conversion is the confession of having accepted what one now sees. Well, some final comments on scientific truth. Someone went, phew. Paradigms are systems of coherence. Remember, they cohere together, and that's why if you ask what number comes after 12 and you're counting by twos, you can't say 13 because that doesn't cohere. It won't fit. There is no 13 when you count by twos. Paradigms are systems of coherence. Kuhn has defined them and explained what it is they do. The truth given by paradigms is the coherent truth of data that fits within each paradigm. The truth that science offers is paradigmatic truth. Its truth is always cohering to some system. Science itself, along with the general public, mistakes paradigmatic truth for correspondence truth. The truth that actually agrees with and corresponds with what's there. What number comes after 12? 13! 13! No! We're counting by twos. It's still 13! Okay. The agreement of what is said with what actually is. A scientific theory is usually felt to be better than its predecessors, not only in the sense that it is a better instrument for discovering and solving puzzles, but also because it is somehow a better representation of what nature is really like. That's what we all think. One often hears that successive theories grow even closer to, they approximate more and more closely to the truth, to match what is between the entities with which the theory populates and the nature and what is really out there. The relationship of what is being said with what's really there. Kuhn is convinced that science is all about paradigms. Paradigms that create paradigmatic truth. That's what science does. To the question whether paradigms actually represent what is ever gets to 13, Kuhn replies, the notion of a match between the ontology of a theory, what a theory is, and its real counterpart in nature now seems to me elusive in principle. Not going to happen. Remember, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. It's because I'm creating the pipe. I'm creating a theory that says what that is, and I don't care what it really is. You can't even say really is, because it doesn't matter. The only thing that really is what I say it is. I think, therefore I am. Notice that Kuhn in his book is not presenting himself a paradigm. He is not discussing anything inside a system. Kuhn is describing what science is. He is describing the invisible structure of the creation of competing coherence systems. Let's count by twos, let's count by threes, let's count by sevens. Competing systems. He is describing how paradigms come to exist, how they work, how they compete, how they win, and how they die. In short, he is discussing the nature of paradigms, not the merits or flaws of any particular paradigm. Kuhn has stepped out of truth as coherence, he's not in a system, and has entered truth as correspondence. He's describing what science is, what science really is. It's really this way. He's not counting by twos. He's counting, there's a 13 and this is science. He's talking about what is correspondence. He is looking beneath the appearance and arguments of paradigms to see the hidden structure of science itself. Kuhn is unhiding the structure of scientific activity. He is presenting the truth, the what is of scientific revolutions, the truth that differs from the common understanding of science itself, the truth that is a quite different concept of science that emerges from the historical record of the research activity itself. When you really study it, he says this is what science is, competing paradigms of coherent truth, not actual truth about what's really there in the universe. Kuhn, therefore, speaks of two kinds of truth: the truth coherent within systems, paradigms, and that paradigmatic truth, and the larger truth of what is, the larger truth of the nature of things, the nature of scientific activity itself, and the truth of how science is, the truth of how science behaves. There really are two kinds of truth today. We live in a world with paradigmatic truth that coheres within a system, within a paradigm, and secondly, the truth of what is, the truth of how things behave. It is this issue of the larger truth of how things are that Jesus speaks of in the Gospel of John. Kuhn spoke of the larger truth of how science is. As we shall see, the Gospel of John speaks the larger truth of how everything is. Well, Christianity in a secular world. We're still not to John, but we're getting closer. Before returning to the Gospel of John, let us consider briefly how Christianity is understood by today's secular world. Thomas Kuhn's analysis of competing scientific paradigms is helpful in understanding how truth is understood in our contemporary world and how the contemporary world approaches Christianity. Only the briefest survey can be outlined here. First, the birth of the modern world and modern science began with the Italian Renaissance that began in the years following the Fourth Crusade in 1204 AD. For 1,200 years prior to the Fourth Crusade, Christianity had existed in a world that understood itself in terms of ancient science, the earth is flat, and the center of the solar system. The truth of Christianity was understood alongside the coherent truth, that ancient paradigm that world is flat, of ancient science, heaven was up and hell was down. Second, the birth of modern science in the 16th century offered a new paradigm in which the earth is round and the sun is the center of the solar system. In the shift from a geocentric paradigm to a helio-sun-centric paradigm, Western Christianity found itself tied to the old paradigm. The image of the Catholic Church threatening Galileo with torture by the Inquisition is still recalled by opponents of Christianity. In reality, initial opposition to Galileo came from university professors who were worried less about impiety than about threats to their academic authority. They've been teaching this whole science forever, and they didn't want to have to deal with the new. The issue between Galileo and the church was power, not science. Galileo insisted the Copernican cosmology, we're going around the sun, was sufficiently well established scientifically that scriptures must conform to it. Pope Urban VIII, due to political intrigue on other issues, which placed him in danger of assassination, withdrew his support from Galileo and abandoned Galileo to his enemies. The world is left with the image of a 70-year-old Galileo on his knees reciting his abjuration with sincere heart and unfeigned faith. I do abjure, damn, and detest the said errors and heresies, and generally each and every other error, heresy, and sect contrary to the Holy Church, and I do swear for the future that I shall never again speak or assert orally or in writing such things as might bring me under similar suspicion. Nor did the Protestants fare any better. Both Calvin and Luther stood against the new scientific paradigm. Who will dare to replace the authority of Copernicus, place that above the Holy Scripture? Calvin demanded. Luther called Copernicus a fool, wishing to reverse the entire science of astronomy, but sacred Scripture tells us that Joshua commanded the sun to stand still, not the earth. Third, the paradigm shift to modern science did take place. The old paradigm of a flat earth that was the center was rejected and abandoned. Christianity, and here I should always be saying Western Christianity. This is all in the West, and it's Western Christianity by its attachment to and its defense of the old paradigm came to be understood as itself a paradigm, a system of truth relative within its own system, but having little or no corresponding truth with the real scientific world. You could argue, and I don't have time to do it at all, Western Christianity, what made it Western was it always went along with culture. Whatever culture was saying, Christianity went with, but it got caught in a bind in this big shift right here, and it hung on to the old and didn't shift to the new fast enough to save itself from now being criticized. Western Christianity found itself defending the old paradigm against the new scientific paradigm. The conflict between two competing scientific paradigms, the ancient worldview versus the new, became instead a conflict between faith and science. Within science, the new paradigm replaced the ancient one. So inside science, they went with the earth is round and we're going around the sun, because Western Christianity tied itself to culture, tied itself to the old paradigm. Modern science then looked at Christianity as outdated as the old paradigm itself, and started this war of faith versus science that we all are familiar with. So that if you say you are a person of faith, someone automatically assumes you're automatically against science. Or if you were really scientific, you would know better than to have faith, because faith is like 13. It doesn't exist anymore. Fourth, the contemporary world understands its conversation with Christianity as a conversation between competing paradigms. The one, the scientific, new and corresponding to the reality of what science is saying, and the other, Christianity, old and as limited and irrelevant as the discarded science of the ancients to which it attached itself. Fifth, a scientific world approaches Christianity as a competing paradigm, an outdated and discredited paradigm that has been abandoned in favor of newer paradigms that offer answers to different problems. Augustine and Calvin's paradigm of Western Christianity, based upon humanity being born consigned to an eternity in hell by an angry divine judge, a humanity in need of acquittal by someone else dying in their place, has been abandoned by contemporary science and the general public alike. Space travel has made it obvious that heaven is not up, nor is there a hell under the earth. Ongoing debates between Western Christianity and contemporary culture are little more than two groups talking through each other. When paradigms enter, as they must, into a debate about paradigm choice, their role is necessarily circular. Each group uses its own paradigm to argue in that paradigm's defense. Secular paradigm versus Christian. Kuhn's analysis of the interaction of one paradigm with another, an interaction that is part of the process of one paradigm replacing the other, is highly instructive if the church is to engage in conversation with contemporary society. If you're thinking this is still abstract, your grandchildren are who I'm talking about. Your grandchildren, we're all going to die off. We're the old fuddy-duzzies nobody cares about because we're in the wrong paradigm. But once we're all gone, the kids are theirs. The grandkids are theirs. We have to understand what we're dealing with if we're going to come and understand what it means when Jesus says, I am the truth. If we don't come to grips with the world in which we're living in, we are just over here as a little group talking to ourselves, totally unaware of what's going on in the world around us. First, the church must acknowledge that contemporary culture in the United States is not Christian. It is secular. Certainly after World War II, a secular paradigm began to emerge. Protestant Christianity in the United States divided in its response to the secular paradigm. Liberal churches embraced the secular paradigm and sought to rethink God in secular terms, which is to say, liberal Christianity committed the same error as conservative Christianity. Both tied themselves to particular scientific paradigms and used those scientific paradigms to understand Christianity. It's the guilty act of Western Christianity. It always defines itself in terms of its culture, rather than making the culture be defined by Christianity. Conservative churches remained entrenched in their pre-scientific Augustinian city of God paradigm. Liberal churches chided the conservative churches, saying, intrinsic conservatism prevents the denominational churches from leaving their palaces behind and stepping into God's permanent revolution in history. Half a century later, neither conservative churches nor liberal Christianity has converted the United States into being Christian. Western Christianity has failed to engage its culture, Christianize its culture, and convert its culture into being Christian. Today we have churches everywhere where whatever is the current fad of the month is now the fad of the church, as an excuse to try to reach today's world and as a way to try to accommodate and make itself appealing to our own grandchildren. Increasingly, what Max Planck confessed has come to pass again. A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die, and a new generation grows up that is familiar with the new. Failing to convert the next generation, Western Christianity is shrinking in the United States numerically, socially, politically, any way you want to count. Significant numbers of youth reared in churches, whether liberal or conservative, never return after leaving for college. The Orthodox Church understands the day of Pentecost, reveals the gospel is to be translated into the various languages of the people, if they are to be persuaded and converted. We have normally thought in terms of translating from Greek into English, French, and German, and so on. But we have failed to understand we must also transmit and, in some cases, translate the gospel into the idiom of today's generation inside our own language, inside English. We have transmitted Bible stories, but we have not translated the gospel message, the gospel paradigm, so that our own children might be persuaded of the truthfulness of the message, and being persuaded might experience conversion personally. Be well assured, what we have failed to do to convert our own children and grandchildren, others outside the church have already done, and even now are selling their message to our children and our neighbors' children. If the Orthodox Church is to have a conversation with our own people, with our own youth, and with the wider culture, we must admit a paradigm shift has taken place. People in the United States no longer function within the cultural paradigm of Augustinian Christianity. In the United States today, people function within a cultural paradigm of secular science. And this includes most of us Orthodox Christians. Secondly, if we are to have a conversation with our own members, our own children, as well as the wider community around us, we must understand the Orthodox faith itself as a new, and I hate to say paradigm, but that's the best way that I can translate it to the other side. So you'll see we are competing against it with an entirely different system that has nothing to do with being attached to some kind of social system or some kind of scientific system. That we are, the Orthodox faith, is an alternative to all other paradigms, both religious and secular. We must come to understand that the gospel is an all-inclusive way of seeing and living life. We are in the world, but we are not of the world. We are not hostile to science, nor are we dependent upon it to understand the gospel. The gospel is its own paradigm, if I dare use that term again. It offers its own Weltanschauung, its own world view. This is important to grasp. The gospel is radically different from all other paradigms. The difference is the difference between the solution to the 9-dot problem and all other failures. If the separate diagrams, remember we did it last week and I'm going to hurry. We had the 9 dots, remember? And we were supposed to try to connect them with 4 straight lines without taking our pencil off the page. And that would have been one possibility right there. And oops, we left one out. We could try it again if I had a different color, and we could take this line out and say, let's go here, let's come like this and across and back up, and now I've left this one out and this one out. And so we could have those that like this paradigm, a square. You could have those that like this paradigm, and we could argue back and forth about which one we like. This one leaves this number out. This one leaves this one and this one out. They all fail to answer all the issues, and you just take your choice of which paradigm you happen to like, or you could come to an entirely different worldview that looks at the 9 dots. Boy, that board doesn't want to write on tonight for some reason. I hope you can maybe understand what we're doing. And so, how in the world can you understand the world outside of that empirical box of the 5 senses? You get out of the box. You stop thinking by the limited by our 5 senses, and you say, okay, there's one line. There's another line, there's the 3rd line, and there we are, the 4th line. Wow, there isn't a box after all. I'm looking at a different world. You have your world that's a box, trying to figure out how to move inside of it, and here we are living in something a lot bigger than that box. Covering all of the dots. There is a 13 after all. We've solved it, you see. If the separate diagrams that failed are understood as separate paradigms, then being failures, they just compete against each other based on a personal preference of which one you like to be in. Well, I like this paradigm. This works for me. I like that one. It works for me. But the solution to that 9-dot problem is an entirely different kind. It reveals itself as the answer, as the correct solution to the way to see things. It's wrong to see things as a box. Get rid of the box and it's open-ended then. You can go outside all the way to here. I can come across all the way outside to here, come back down to here, and there I am off into infinity and beyond. We're not tied up in a finite box. We now have infinity to deal with, using that again as a metaphor. Thirdly, having learned the language of the gospel and practicing it, living it, we must then translate our paradigm, our Christian world view, this view that's bigger than the box, into metaphors and terms that our own people, our own children, and our neighbors will be able to hear, and turn aside as did Moses and check out this faith that burns and gives light and life. It is important to note we do not use contemporary paradigms to support the gospel. We translate the gospel into contemporary terms as a means of having a conversation with today's world. Contemporary terms and paradigms will shift and change throughout history, but not the gospel. The gospel must never be identified with any paradigm, scientific, political, social, psychological, or even theological. We must be careful that we do not substitute contemporary ideas for that which has been believed everywhere, always, by all, lest we deceive ourselves by offering not a translation of the gospel, but a novelty that nowhere was ever believed by anyone until now by some of us. The gospel bears witness to the mystery of the truth. The church today must do as the Greek fathers of the church did when faced with the paradigm of ancient Hellenism that shaped the thinking of the Roman Empire. The Greek fathers engaged in a radical reorientation of their culture, a radical reorientation of Hellenism in regard to knowledge and truth that led to the revision of Greek ontology and the formation of Christian theology. The Greek fathers abandoned Greek ontology philosophy and took on the task of overturning conversion and baptism of the Greek mind into a radical Christianization of Hellenism. The church had a radical Christianization of their culture. What Western Christianity has failed to do, Orthodox Christianity must now do in the West. We must take up the task of overturning, converting, and baptizing the Western secular mind until a radical Christianization of the secular world around us occurs. And if you think that is impossible, there were only 12 apostles facing the entire Hellenized Roman Empire. It begins with us. It begins with every single Orthodox Christian beginning to be Christianized ourselves, learning the gospel, coming and reading John as an example, coming to the services, allowing the Spirit of God to touch us so that we now see what we've not yet seen, we hear what we've not yet heard, and we know what we know without knowing how we know it, because illumination has taken place. Well, I'm ready for a drink of water. Let's take a break. We'll come back and continue this on just a little bit more. Thank you. Well, I was asked over the break if this story has a happy ending. And thank God it does. Thank God it does. Conversion to the Orthodox faith. Conversion to the Orthodox faith. Let us revisit some earlier comments, this time in terms of converting from one religious or secular paradigm to the paradigm of the Orthodox faith. I'm using willing to call us a paradigm. It's a misnomer, but we have to find some kind of common word to use in a conversation. So I'm willing to use the word paradigm so we can at least understand that you can't synthesize this stuff. They're two separate systems. In other words, let us apply Kuhn's comments to versions of Christianity rather than versions of science or secular social theory. Conversion, the transition to the new paradigm of the Orthodox faith, is not achieved by adding to or extending something new onto one's prior paradigm. It's not MTV plus Jesus, nor is it MTV plus Jesus plus icons. You don't get to just add something on. Rather, conversion is a reconstruction of the field from new fundamentals, a reconstruction that changes some of the field's most elementary theoretical generalizations, as well as many of its paradigm methods and applications. The new paradigm of the gospel offers a new and fresh way of looking at the facts, of handling the same bundle of facts as before, but placing them in a new system of relations with one another by giving them a different framework. That, behold, all things have passed away, all things have become new. A new framework. The change amounts to a change in visual gestalt, such as looking at an optical illusion. I'm just taking what we already said and now applying it, of whether one sees Albert Einstein or Marilyn Monroe. The new paradigm of the Orthodox faith creates a new visual gestalt, a new way of seeing the world. For all intents and purposes, the new paradigm lets one see and enter a new world, a different universe of discourse and living. In a sense that I'm unable to explicate further, the proponents of competing paradigms practice their trades in different worlds. Practicing in two different worlds, the two groups of Christians, Western Christians versus Orthodox Christians, see different things when they look from the same point in the same direction. Again, this is not to say that they can see anything they please, but are looking at the same world, and what they look at has not changed. But in some areas, they see different things, and they see them in a different relation to other. Western Christianity is a paradigm created by Augustine. Catholics and Protestants share the same basic paradigm, though from two slightly differing versions or schools of thought. Orthodox Christianity, Eastern Christianity, is an entirely, fundamentally, and categorically different paradigm. Unlike Catholics and Protestants, who have in common their basic paradigm of Augustinian Christianity, there is no such common paradigm between Christianity and either Catholic or Protestant expressions. The difference is absolutely and fundamentally different. It is this reality of two separate paradigms that gives rise to the tension or crisis of having to choose between the two. A paradigm shift is a crisis. If the new is true, then all the knowledge based on the old is not true. One who has devoted a lifetime to understanding faith inside one religion and has mastered the knowledge created inside that religion will not easily replace that religion with a new one, especially at the cost of discarding everything he knows to begin all over at square one in a new paradigm, to begin all over not knowing anything inside the new. That's why conversion, is everybody lost? Do we know where we are? None of this is in your books? Is it in your book, Michael? Well, I apologize to you. My goodness. Okay. I'll slow it down just a little bit. Sorry. My page numbers don't go with your page numbers because I have to have it big enough that I can read it. This is why a conversion is a revolution. I'll plug into a title in a minute and see if you're there. It is this that makes the Orthodox faith a costly pearl of great price. Just pretend you're at a Billy Graham crusade. You didn't have a script there either. You just have to listen. It is this that makes the Orthodox faith a pearl of great price, for which one sells all that he has, gives up his old paradigm for the new wineskin, the new paradigm of the real gospel. Conversion is a process that begins with persuasion. Persuasion begins by turning aside to see, to hear, to learn, and to listen to a translation, an introduction to the Orthodox faith. In turning aside at some point, the second step occurs in which inquirers begin the process of translating for themselves into their own language what they encounter within the new paradigm of the Orthodox faith. We're understanding what's happening when somebody comes to your inquirers classes, or when you're chatting with them, or they begin to convert or think about converting to the faith, the steps that are at work in this. Since you, let me look at your book real quick just to see, where did I quit that you had something?
Page 911.
May I see it just a second? I am the truth. I am the truth is the next place you have. Then you're just going to have to listen. There is a difference in being a translator of the Orthodox faith, one who knows what the Orthodox faith is, and those who live inside the Orthodox faith. For example, there are academic scholars who have understood what St. Maximus the Confessor wrote and have translated what he wrote into English. But those translators did not themselves believe what St. Maximus wrote and did not convert to the paradigm that St. Maximus lived. They're translators, can understand what he is saying, but don't see it. This is important to note. Not everyone who externally knows the Orthodox faith has converted to that faith. This includes those who were born into the faith. They have accepted the idea of the Orthodox faith without actually living there. On the other hand, others find themselves converted. Yaroslav Pelikan, the Sterling Professor of History at Yale University, a Lutheran minister who was the leading authority in the world on Martin Luther in the 20th century, at the age of 74, embraced the Orthodox faith and became an Orthodox layman. He said that he had not so much converted to Orthodoxy as I returned to it, peeling back the layers of my own belief to reveal the Orthodox faith that was always there. Often for cradles and converts alike, conversion was not so much a choice, but a dawning upon them after the fact that they are converted. It was not so much a decision. Instead, at some point in the process of learning to translate, one finds that the transition has occurred, that he has slipped inside the new language without a conscious decision to do so. The consequences of changing one's residence from the Catholic Protestant paradigm to living in the Orthodox paradigm are dramatic. New knowledge from a new paradigm does not replace ignorance. It replaces the old knowledge of the old paradigm. Einstein's theory can be accepted only with the recognition that Newton's was wrong. There is no middle ground between paradigms. Paradigms are each all-inclusive. One cannot have a foot in both worlds. One might be half German or half French. It is impossible to be half Catholic and half Muslim. Conversion describes the moment it dawns on a person that they are Orthodox, and therefore simultaneously know they are no longer Protestant or Catholic or Buddhist or atheist or secularist. It is at this point the choice must be made to renounce who they once were and confess who they now are. You see, as a summary then, a paradigm shift is a crisis. If we minimize this, we don't understand who we are, what the Orthodox faith is. It is not just inside the box and it's a different alternative. It is a radical reconstruction to understand this is what the world really is. It therefore is a crisis. If the new is true, then all the knowledge based on the old is not true in how it connected and how we understood it. So how do we evangelize? Introducing others to the Orthodox faith is important. Sharing the Orthodox faith with inquirers makes the Orthodox paradigm accessible. However, while translation makes the Orthodox faith accessible, this does not guarantee persuasion or conversion, all that stuff we talked about. Everything on our part begins with living the experience of salvation for ourselves. Let me say that again. Everything on our part begins with living the experience of salvation for ourselves, and then translating our lives into terms our children, our friends, and our neighbors can see and understand. We cannot teach what cannot be taught, but we can live it. If one person repents, if one person receives the grace of God, he supplies the oxygen of life and hope to the whole world. If one person believes, repents, and begins living in the kingdom of God, living our salvation, what we've been talking about in this class in the Gospel of John, what John has been leading us to see, going on, a year and a half now, begin to live that. He supplies oxygen of life and hope to the whole world. We live in a world that has exterminated the sacred. The new paradigm of this age has exterminated the sacred. Are we in there somewhere?
Yeah.
Page 911?
911, top.
Top of page 911? Or whatever? Okay. We live in a world that has exterminated the sacred. The new paradigm of this present age has exterminated the sacred. The loss of the sacred and the loss of the experience of mystical reality result from abandoning a cosmos that is both visible and invisible. When we choose to live only in a visible, empirical world, we have abandoned not only mystery, we have abandoned freedom. We who are born free choose instead to become slaves and live in a box, remember our 9-dot box, of our own choosing. The gospel offers a different world to live in. It is not the old Western Christian paradigm based on a pre-scientific world that we offer, nor is it a new paradigm based on a current scientific world based on Descartes. The different world of the gospel simultaneously contains both the visible world itself and the invisible, dynamically, simultaneously existing as a mystery to the human mind. It is this simultaneity of the visible and invisible, the simultaneity of the sacred and the profane, the divine and the human, the already and the not yet, the kingdom that we see and the kingdom that is here that we don't see. The simultaneity of the world, the universe, and the cosmos, the creation, the arena, all of that is embraced in the Orthodox gospel. This simultaneity, simultaneously coexisting in the same place with us, in the same world that we are in, is the world that the Orthodox gospel embraces and proclaims. This simultaneity is metaphorically illustrated in the following picture. And I don't know if you've got a picture. You don't or you do? Some do, some don't. Well, for those that don't, here it is. So, how many circles do you see? Well, you'd probably need a telescope from back there to see this. That's the biggest I could blow it up. Some of you may have it in your book. You can come up afterwards and look at this if you can't see it. I know you can't see it from there. But it's you stand here and look at it, and the next thing you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 16 circles will begin to pop out at you. They're both there simultaneously. It's an illustration. Some will diligently look and never see any of the circles. Father Elias today looked at this and probably took him 15 minutes before he blinked his eyes enough times to go, there they are. They're jumping out at me all over the place. Others will look and suddenly you'll see the 16 circles. There are those who arbitrarily exterminate the sacred from the world they live in. There are no circles simultaneously existing in their world, in their reality. Of course, saying and behaving as if there are no circles does not make it so. Once anyone has seen the circles, experienced the presence of the circles, they can never again be unseen. The presence of the sacred within our world, like the presence of the circles within the illustration, exist whether our personal paradigm accepts or denies them. 13 exist whether my paradigm says so or not. Note, if you've not yet seen the circles, I've got it for you, and some of it's got it. You see this, I want you to also see the problem we're having, because I don't have it all in your books, is because the living the gospel and experiencing the gospel of Jesus Christ is not static. It's not static for me as I read the Gospel of John. It's not static in having worked on this now for 4 or 5 or 6 years. It's still a living presence and a living reality that I'm struggling to translate into language so that you can see this world that's outside of the box and suddenly see all of the possibilities of living in paradise here already, now already, in the kingdom of God He has come to give us life and not death. Wow! I'm talking about something, and John has been telling us something ever since he started. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And he's been trying to put into human words what in the world he saw on the Mount of Transfiguration. What it means that God became one of us. So it's still a work in progress. John said if everything that could be said was said, the world couldn't hold all the books. I'm going to have to quit editing this thing because you see the problem. The Orthodox gospel is based on the paradigm of the simultaneity of the divine and the human, in which the sacred and the profane interact. The Orthodox paradigm is a mystery, a reality that is not definable, but is experiential. The gospel offers entrance into the world of the sacred, in which we become the abode of the uncontainable mystery. The gospel offers the paradigm of all paradigms and the truth of all truth. The paradigm the gospel offers is not a system. The paradigm is a person. That's in your books, right? Yeah. Amen. I am the truth. Amen. Jesus is the truth. Jesus is the correspondence with what is. When we see Jesus, we see what is. We see is. Jesus is truth. Truth is not the facts about Him, even true facts. The truth is Him, Himself. He and the truth He reveals are one and the same. There is complete correspondence between Him and what He reveals. Unlike Hinduism, truth is a person. Unlike Gnosticism, truth is a person. Truth is this one, and He has a human body. I am the truth. The one speaking has a human body. He is not only God, He is also human. He is the truth of God, and He is the truth of being human. He is fully God and fully man. Jesus is what it means to be human. Jesus is what it means to be God. He is both simultaneously. He reveals in both directions. In the Transfiguration, the cosmic mystery of the universe is revealed. Christ not only shows us how we are to exist, He also shows us how Trinity exists, and by so doing, reveals to us how the whole cosmos exists. Boy, you talk about infinity and beyond. Revealed who we are, reveals how Trinity is, and how then the creation is that He has created. There is only one way. It is the way, the how, the manner of the Trinity that pulses throughout the cosmos. All creation pulses with a trembling that speaks to us of things unspeakable and reveals to us things unseen. It is the voice of the second person of the Trinity that echoes throughout the cosmos, calling creation into existence, sustaining its existence, and calling each of us by name. Well, this is heavy stuff. And since I didn't have all of it written for you, it made it even tougher. And I apologize to you for those that didn't have it. We're going to stop there. We are still working our way through I am the way, the truth, and the life. You'll be happy to know we've now put behind us scientific truth. So we can now begin to comprehend, having plowed the field, what it is when Jesus is the truth. So God bless you for coming on this very, very cold night, and we'll do it again next week. Thank you. Thank you. Please be careful going home.